Thank you very much, Scott. How's everybody doing today? Good. Can you hear me in the back? Very, thank you. I'm going to try to get my PowerPoint up here. Is Tony?
Yeah, it's
switch?
That is that your desktop that's up there right now? I already switched it.
Okay, that looks much better. Thank you. So it's a great honor for me to be here. People always say that, right? But I'll tell you why it is for me. I have a near and dear place for the Izaak Walton League in my heart based on some really important time that I spent at the Izaak Walton Chapter in southern Indiana. I grew up on the shores of the banks of the Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana. Is anybody here from Evansville? Southern Indiana?
Real Jim.
So we have a chapter there. When I was our family had a family membership in a chapter there. We went there occasionally as a family. My dad took me there, started me off shooting there. It's kind of what happened. But where the switch really happened for me was once I got my driver's license. So me and my three best friends from high school, we just spent every free minute we had at the Izaak Walton chapter there near Evansville. Had lakes and strip pits for fishing. We camped and hiked, and it had trap and skeet. I'd never seen a trap or skeet range. I learned how to do that. Shot trap at night with glow-in-the-dark clays. I'd never seen that before. Long-range rifle. I'd never shot anything past 50 yards before I went out there. So anyway, we spent a ton of time. We just called it going to Izaak. That was just our, you going to Izaak this Saturday? Yeah, going to Izaak. And we spent a lot of time there. So really that time and the things that I did there really shaped my career and a lot of my thoughts and feelings about wildlife and the outdoors. So it's great to be able to kind of bring that full circle and maybe give a little something back to this organization that's meant so much to me. So who am I and why should you care what I have to say? Personally, I'm a lifelong hunter, angler, competitive shooter, boater, certified hunter education instructor, reloader. I mean, if it had to do anything to do with the outdoors, I was in, and am in, still am. Professionally, I am a wildlife biologist by formal training. I have a degree in forestry from Purdue and a degree in wildlife biology from University of Missouri. Intended to be a research biologist, but halfway through my master's, I met Dave Case, who started DJ Case and Associates, the company I work for. And it was really about communicating with the public about these issues, and I was struck by the need for doing that. And so right out of graduate school, I joined Dave. He had started a company a few years earlier, and it's the only job I've ever had. So what is DJ Case? Well, it's communications consulting, all related to natural resources conservation. So we work with state and federal agencies, Iowa Department of Natural Resources, and all its sister agencies around the country. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, BLM, all the major federal landholding agencies, as well as private nonprofit conservation organizations like IKES, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, Rocky Mountain Elk. We work with most of those nationally, all about helping those agencies and organizations communicate better about wildlife and natural resources, helping them communicate with their publics, their constituents, about wildlife and natural resources issues. So we have people on our staff, there are 13 of us now, people on our staff trained in the hard sciences and trained in the social sciences. And then we blend those two to help make this happen. Recently, we at DJ Case have been doing a lot of work on hunter and angler recruitment, retention, reactivation, this notion of how can we communicate better with people to encourage them to take up those activities. We were instrumental in taking adoption theory, which has been around since the 70s, how to get people to take some action, some persuasive communications, trying to adapt adoption theory to wildlife and natural resources. So we've been doing a lot of work in this arena and using social science and communication techniques and theories to help communicate more effectively about conservation. That's what I'd like to talk to you about today. So it's no secret that society is changing, perhaps at a faster rate than ever before. There's concern that we may be losing our voice for conservation of wild things and wild places. Will we be able to engage the next generation and the one after that to carry on the conservation legacy of Izaak Walton? Or will they be satisfied with their electronic representations of nature in their air-conditioned cocoons? So the first thing I'd like to do today is share some information about how Americans in general think and feel about nature and conservation. Are our concerns about the future of conservation valid? And then I'd like to share with you some of the generational differences that exist within American society, which will provide clues to how to better reach out to that next generation and engage them in conservation of natural resources. So what do Americans think and feel about nature? This information that I'll be sharing comes from the Nature of Americans, as Scott mentioned, a landmark, groundbreaking study that DJ Case completed in 2016. The initiative was inspired by Dr. Stephen Keller, Professor Emeritus at Yale University, who sadly passed away in 2016, right before this survey information was released. Dr. Keller was the leader in researching and articulating the importance of contact with nature to human health and well-being. And this initiative was a culmination of that lifetime of his work. You might know Dr. Keller. He and E.O. Wilson from Harvard were the ones who coined the biophilia hypothesis, this notion that the human organism has a need for a connection with nature to be fully fulfilled. So this Nature Americans initiative was a combination of 3 major research efforts. 15 focus groups across the country. I conducted many of those. A representative online survey of over 10,000 adults all across the country, so big sample size there. And then interviews, this is a really unique aspect of the project, was interviews with 771 8 to 12-year-old children and a parent, at least one parent of those children. So we're able to interview children, find out what they think, and then compare what their views were with their parents' views. Very fascinating results that came from that. These interviews were conducted webcam to webcam. So rather than meeting with children in person, which causes all kinds of legal issues, meeting face-to-face, we conducted them via webcams. Most often, a parent was present, as you see here, with the child as they did the interview, but the parent didn't participate with the child that they interviewed. Rather, we interviewed the parent then later through online interview. So what did we find? Well, it'll come as no surprise to any of you that Americans admit they're largely disconnected from the natural world. I'm not sure what this person's doing, but it shows a lot of disconnection. The primary source of disconnection is competing priorities. Americans face competing priorities for their time, their attention, and their money. They have children, long commutes, and exhausting jobs. The mother of a young child told us in a focus group, work at home, go put the kids to bed. That's pretty much all we have time for. And we heard this a lot throughout the focus groups. One of the effects of competing priorities is that Americans today spend relatively little time outside in nature. Across all respondents, the average American spends only 7 hours a week outside. Over half said they spend 5 hours or fewer a week outside in nature. Bottom line here, Americans are spending their time indoors, and more. That's increasing. The second reason for disconnection from nature is shifting expectations. Among adults, shared expectations about what good connection to nature looks like have changed markedly. Older adults said it used to be normal to spend time exploring, playing, and discovering outdoors. They worry because it's not the same for their children and grandchildren. This was a theme we heard over and over. Adults are generally concerned about the younger generations growing up without the same nature experiences that were so positive and important to them. Many of you probably feel the same way, I know I do. If the shared expectation used to be that kids spent most of their time playing outdoors, that's no longer the case. We asked parents, in a typical week, how much time does your child spend on the following activities? There was a long list of specific activities we asked them about. We grouped them here and recorded it by age. As you can see on the left side of the chart, time on computers and TV towers over time spent outdoors. And this increases with age, as you see, while time spent outdoors, shown on the right side, decreases as children get older. The trend is not good. The absolute numbers aren't good, and the trend isn't good. Here's a second example of shifting expectations. Most adults in our study reported spending relatively little time outside in nature each week, and most were satisfied with the little time that they did spend. Even in the group who spent 2 hours or less per week outdoors, which I'm sure you all agree is not much time, nearly half of those adults are satisfied with that little amount that they're spending. It's becoming normal in American society to spend relatively little time outdoors. So you can no longer rely on shared expectations or social norms to get people outdoors. You'll have to be more explicit than that. Finally, focus group participants were blunt about the role of technology, especially electronic gadgets and media. Technology is ruining the kids. Technology kept kids from getting outdoors. Technology keeps people from remembering what's around them, what's outside. But don't despair. There's hope. There's always reason for hope. There are many bright spots also that came out of the research, which I'll share some with you now. First, let's look at children in our study. We asked parents if they thought their child's contact with nature or outdoor activities has contributed to the improvement of any ailments. 26% of parents agreed. 1 in 4 parents said that contact with nature has contributed to the improvement of ailments. We then asked them what ailments their child's contact with nature had improved. This is a word cloud showing the most frequent words they use when we ask that question. As you can see, parents reported improvements in a child's physical health, such as weight loss, reduction in allergies, and increased physical fitness, as well as psychological well-being, including greater happiness and self-esteem, and reductions in anxiety and attention deficit disorder, ADHD. This is pretty impressive stuff. We really wanted to explore children's relationships with nature, and the results gave us more reason for hope. Here are 2 questions that we asked. Do you agree or disagree with the following statements? I'd rather explore woods and trees than play on neat-looking grass. 70% of children in our survey agreed with that. Then we asked a similar question, kind of the opposite approach. Do you agree I don't enjoy outdoor activities like climbing trees and camping? You can see where 81% disagreed with that. We'd like to ask questions in opposite direction in case you get some children that just answer the way you think, the way they think you want them to. So we asked them in both directions, and here you see that it didn't really matter how we asked it. They liked spending time outside. Adults also recognize nature's benefits to their own health and well-being. 3 out of 4 adults in the U.S. say getting into nature is very or extremely important for their physical health. I'll try to pause on these just a little bit, but I have a lot to cover, so I can't spend too much time. When we asked about their emotional outlook, the results were practically identical. 3 out of 4 said getting into nature is very or extremely important for their emotional outlook. They also rate their interest in nature very highly. We asked, how do your interests in nature compare with your other interests? 1/4 of adults say their interests in nature are their most enjoyable interests, and another half say it's among their more enjoyable interests. The point here is that you don't have to convince most Americans that nature is enjoyable. It already is. But you may need to redefine it. Super important. I'll get to that here shortly. When we asked adults if their pastimes, hobbies, and interests are more outdoors-oriented, indoors-oriented, or about the same, 40% said indoors. Only 1/4 said outdoors-oriented. Now that is not really a reason for optimism, but let's contrast that with the same question with children. We asked children, do you have more fun playing indoors, outdoors, or the same? Only 10% say indoors. Based on these results, it may be that we have a parent problem, not a child problem. It could be there's time constraints, there's fear of stranger danger, there's latchkey kids, parents don't want to let their kids out of their immediate supervision, all these factors that affect a child's time outdoors, but the kids say they would rather spend the time outdoors. Now, how you frame the question, of course, has an impact on how it's answered. If we frame this, you have more fun playing outdoors or playing computer games or playing Nintendo or something like that, sure, I'm sure we change the percentage, but I think you have to think about it writ large. When a child thinks about just indoors versus outdoors, they largely prefer outdoors. A final reason for optimism comes from questions we asked about programming and funding. half of Americans think programs for Americans to enjoy nature and wildlife are underfunded. They don't say where the money may come from, of course, but they think it's underfunded. And 3 out of 4 agree that we need to increase the number of programs available for Americans to enjoy nature, the outdoors, and wildlife. 3/4 want to increase it. Nearly half strongly agree with this sentiment. The Izaak Walton League is already providing this programming that Americans seek, and I believe is well positioned to provide even more. Even more impressive, this agreement about the need for more programs crosses political boundaries. Look at that, and 71% is the lowest percent of folks who agreed. So no matter where you stand in the aisle or across the aisle or whatever the euphemism is, you recognize the need for contact with nature and interest in seeing more programs to help people do that. We like to call this the united nature of Americans. And I think it's a real opportunity for conservation. Hunting, fishing, and outdoor recreation can serve as a rallying point to build a sense of community, a chance for common ground that we so rarely see over almost any other topic these days. So Americans say they recognize the value of nature and conservation, but how do those values differ across generations? First, we should define what we mean by generations. And I'd like to point out that there really isn't any standard. So when people say the baby boom or millennials, different researchers have defined that, when that generation starts and ends, and there's no standard. So we just have to pick one. So the one that we picked is as follows. Silent, or sometimes called the greatest generation, born before 1946, actually that would be 73 or older. And sometimes that generation is split out into more, but we lumped it into one. So born before 46. Baby boomers, until recently, the largest generation in U.S. history, 1946 to 1964. And this is the one that's most standard, if you want to say that. Most people define the baby boomers 46 to 64, but not all. Generation X, Gen Xers, 65 to 79. Generation Y, or the so-called Millennials, 1980 to 94. Some people push this more like 85 to 2000. We've used 1980 to 94 in the results you're going to see. And then Generation Z, 1995 to 2001 is the last year where a Generation Z is an adult, 18 or older. So this generation will be something bigger than this, but in terms of adults, it goes from 95 to 2001. And the millennial generation is where we're going to spend most of our time today. Why is that? Well, if we proceed from the premise that the Izaak Walton League and conservation in general wants to recruit newer, younger members with young families, most of these are going to fall into the millennial generation. So what do we know about this group? Here are some of the common generalities about this diverse generation. And before I begin, a warning. These are generalities, right? These are stereotypes, if you want to say that. So, of course, any individual, every generation has the full continuum of personality types and all the attributes I'm going to show. But if you take the U.S. population and get averages for these attributes, and you pull out the millennials and you average these attributes, that's the comparison I'm going to be showing. So, for instance, urban. Millennials tend to be more urban. So take the urban-rural spectrum from the entire U.S. adult population, pull millennials out, the average millennial is going to be more urban than the average U.S. adult. You all with me? That's what I'm going to report here. More racially and ethnically diverse than the U.S. population as a whole. More educated, their education levels. Very interested in social and environmental issues. More interested in social and environmental issues than the U.S. population as a whole. Plugged in. For the most part, they grew up with the internet and they use it a lot. Authenticity is very important for this group. So they don't like to be played. They don't like spin, right? They want, even if it's bad news, tell me what like it is. Tell me how it is. Don't spin it for me. Quality, very important. As an example, if a millennial decides they're going to take up trap shooting, more likely to save up for a longer time and buy a nice trap gun than just to go out and buy an entry-level Mossberg to get started. So they like quality stuff. And they value experiences. Oftentimes they collect experiences. They would much rather be, again, talking on average, they would rather have the toe dipped into a lot of different ponds than to be an expert or go full swimming into one pond. They highly value experiences. And this is very interesting. They don't like to be labeled. So I had a really good poignant experience about this. I was giving a similar presentation about these data to the Alaska Fishing Game just a few months ago. And there was a young woman, a millennial, who was in the group I was speaking to, explaining these data, and I could tell she was frowning, she was scowling, she wasn't with me. So I kind of just said, I see something's wrong. We're not on the same page. What is it? She said, well, I just don't see the value in having these labels. It seems divisive to me. It seems like it would split us apart rather than trying to focus on what's common. And so we had a long conversation with the group about the value of, if you can identify these generalities, if we all agree we don't have resources to speak one-on-one with every person in the country, then finding the places that we want to focus on, that we want to target, is really important. It's what marketing is all about. And Alaska Fishing Game had specifically said we want to focus on women and millennials. And so after we talked through, she's like, oh yeah, I get that. And I guess, she said, I guess it's not really that I disagreed with the premise, it's that I didn't want to be labeled. And then right about that time, I got to this section in the presentation about, well, yeah, that's a function of the generation, right? It's not that, many of us don't like to be labeled. But it was really a good example, I thought, of how the problem she was having was an actual really good validation of the research that suggests her generation didn't like to be labeled. So, and one more thing before I leave that. When we take these data and apply them to individuals, then we got to back off, right? And we don't want to stereotype individuals. We don't want to generalize about individuals, but it can be very helpful as we try to target people to communicate with, and how we communicate, what we communicate, can be much more effective, much more targeted if we do this as a first step. So now I'm going to show you some of the survey results that I previously talked about, broken out, cross-tabulated by generation. So in the question about their interest in nature compared to other interests, you can see that 40% of millennials describe their interest in nature as their most enjoyable interest, higher than any other generation. Significantly higher than any other generation. Now, it's great to see that the majorities of all of the American generations find things of nature to be among their more enjoyable interests, but millennials stand out in this regard, something that's not often contributed to them, I think. Concern has been expressed that the torch for outdoor activity and nature appreciation has not been passed by older generations, or that younger generations have not taken the torch. Instead, we found that large pluralities of all generations indicated their interest in nature were actually more than their parents, and this was especially so for millennials, a majority of which, 56%, said that their nature interests were more than their parents held. Now, we don't know whether their nature interests are actually more than their parents for any of these, right? We didn't compare that. This is all perception. But I think it's telling that millennials perceive, again by significantly more than other generations, that their interest in these activities is more than their parents. Certainly was a surprise to me, not what I expected at all. And when we asked, as time goes on, do you find your interest in nature growing, declining, or remaining unchanged, 7 in 10 members of Generation Z and millennials described their nature interest as growing, as did 5 in 10 of Gen Xers. Boomers and members of the silent generation were most likely to express that nature interests remain unchanged as time goes on, which probably is not surprising given that they've been through most of the great changes in their lives and have established rhythms and patterns that are less subject to change at this stage, but still interesting and higher than the others. Across generations, when asked about increasing the number of programs available for Americans to enjoy nature, millennials were most likely to strongly agree, 52%, followed closely by Gen Z at 47%. Older generations agree with the idea of increasing the number of nature-oriented programs, but their support was less enthusiastic, shall we say, than younger generations. Notably, more millennials than any other generation strongly agree that being in nature helps give meaning and purpose to my life, at 45%. Majorities of all generations at least somewhat agree. But we're talking about nature helping to give meaning and purpose to life. I mean, this is pretty impressive stuff in my head. And again, millennials leading the pack. Look at this. We asked, how would you rate your interest in belonging to nature organizations? Among the generations, millennials were the most likely to express a lot of interest, 26% of them, while Gen Zers and millennials tied at 4 in 10, expressing some interest in belonging to nature organizations. How do we explain this in the light of the common perception that millennials don't join organizations at the same rate as their predecessors? I contend it's Exhibit A. It's not that they aren't interested, it's that we aren't speaking their language. So if we want to try to attract and engage millennials, where do we find them? One thing is certain, be sure you have an accurate and engaging web presence, because they spend a lot of time on the internet. Remember those earlier attributes I showed, authenticity and quality? So if you have a crappy website that's not updated, if it has inaccurate or old information, that's going to be a showstopper for this generation. When this group seeks new information about nature or anything really, over 95% begin with a Google or a search engine search. So again, you want to make sure that you have a presence where they're looking, where they're going to find you. And search engine searches, Google most notably, is where that is. And be sure to have a solid social media presence too. 60% use social media as an important source of news and current affairs. Unheard of just a few years ago. Well, unavailable just a few more years ago than that, right? But social media as source of news and current affairs is a relatively recent thing, and it's growing in leaps and bounds, really in all generations, but especially in this one. The 2014 survey, already a little dated, here's the activities that millennial outdoor consumers said they participated in most often. So this was Outdoor Industry Association survey asking outdoor consumers from the millennial generation what they were interested in. So you had running, jogging, participating in a race, surfing, snowboarding, yoga, indoors, playing team sports, outdoor yoga, and participating in an obstacle race. So if your chapter is located in an area where these activities are offered, that would probably be a good place to go to find millennials and to recruit, etc. Trailheads, stores that sells equipment, that kind of thing. Remember, this is really important, millennials are much more likely to be members of communities of interest rather than communities of place. What do we mean by that? I'm not sure how it was for you, but when I grew up, I knew everybody on my block. We had block parties, a lot of the families had children my age, so I knew a lot of them that way, but there were also couples that didn't have kids. There were also elderly people in my block. We knew all of them, and we got together a lot. We knew what was going on in their families. I grew up in suburbia, southern Indiana. Now I live in suburbia in northern Indiana, and I don't know hardly any of my neighbors. I know the people on either side of me. I know the people across the street, and that's about it. I don't know much about what they're doing because we hardly see each other. What little free time I have, I'm off in my community of interest. I'm doing the things that I want to do with the people that are very much like me. So it's changed a lot. So these communities of place, where before it was your neighborhood or your neighborhood association or both, the town council, civic groups, church groups, that kind of thing, that has declined a lot, and it's being replaced by these communities of interest. Microsoft Excel users group. If you're a spreadsheet nerd, you can geek out on that with all kinds of other people like you online. 65 Mustang Owners Facebook group. Deer hunting listserv. There's listservs and social media groups for anything you can think of, and everything you can imagine. And that's where people are going, myself included, to meet other people who share the same interests. And this is just some data showing the decline in these communities of place. Top one is a member of a group. Second down, interested in politics. Third, attends church regularly. Fourth, attends a club regularly. All these communities are placed in decline. And here's some more. I'll just read a couple. Served as an officer in the Seng Club organization. From 74 to 94, declined 42%. Worked for a political party, declined 42%. Served on a committee for some local organization, declined 39%. And on and on. These communities of place in decline, while at the same time, internet use on the rise. So, largely reflecting communities of interest, all generations are increasing internet use and use of these communities of interest, but you see it most notably on the left. The younger generations are really into those a lot. So, on one hand, the Nature of American study and other research shows that Americans are disconnected from nature. On the other hand, they express very strong interest, especially the millennial generation, surprise to many. We've been referring to this as the interest-action gap. Interest-action gap between what they say and what they're apparently doing. So here are some high-level recommendations for closing that gap and engaging the next generation of hikes and conservationists in general. The first recommendation is to redefine this connection with nature that I referred to earlier. And I think this one may be the most important. What do I mean by that? Well, you here in this room think of connecting with nature. Many of you probably think of this, alone, immersed in a remote setting. I know I do. Or this. Or maybe this. And no surprise, adults in our research have bought into these expectations about what true or pure experiences in nature require. It looks a lot like that. As one respondent said, the Grand Canyon, nature at its best when I went. It's beautiful. I've never seen it before, like nature out there by itself. Yet our research shows that the majority of Americans cannot experience nature in this way. They don't have the time, they don't have the money. The vast majority of Americans will never see the Grand Canyon. Or if they have the time and money, maybe it's only once a year, or maybe once in a lifetime. They can go to any kind of iconic place like that. So if people are convinced that nature is something they can only experience at a distant place, and they'll miss out on the opportunity to take advantage of nature's benefits close to home on a routine, day-to-day basis. We need to redefine this connection with nature. We need to show that it's okay to have a great experience very close to home, right out your back door. The same applies to hunting and fishing. If we frame these as activities that can only be done or that are best done in some distant remote place, we really constrain our ability to engage broader audiences in these activities. All of your chapters, and I'd say especially those that own land in local areas, have a huge opportunity to help redefine nature to everyone's benefit. The good news is that kids are already experts at forming connection with nature close to home. Our results show that children consistently place nature as local, just out the back door. For children, you don't need to load them in the car yet again to give them times in the outdoors they'll never forget, or a special place to remember. We asked children, is there any place outdoors that is special to you? If yes, please tell me about this place and why it's special. Note that play, backyard, park, house, and woods all stand out. Children rarely talk about a one-off trip to a place like the Grand Canyon. It's also worth pointing out how socially grounded these special places outdoors are to children. All those social words that came out of what they said, which leads me to recommendation number 2. Connection to nature needs to have a social aspect. Nature experience alone can be a powerful thing, no doubt. It has been for me, but this is the exception, not the primary way that Americans writ large experience nature. Americans are clear. When they talk about their most memorable moments and their special places outdoors, they nearly always involve other people, people whom they care about, people with whom they are familiar. Americans make time for nature when they have the social support to do so, and when the activities involve friends and families, especially the younger generations. Same is true for attracting new participants in hunting and fishing. I mentioned that DJ Case is doing a lot of work with hunter and angler recruitment and retention. We found this to be social support for these activities is the number one factor regarding whether someone will maintain an activity in the future. Our social scientist Daniel Escher captured this well. Americans want to be alone in nature together. Paying attention to the social aspect is important because 51% of adults indicated they do not like being in nature by themselves. And these percentages grow for the younger generation. Young and middle-aged adults are most likely to agree they do not like being in nature by themselves. Half of our population, these aren't us, right? They look different from us, but half of the U.S. population doesn't want to be in nature alone. As an example of how much nature experiences are social experiences, consider this question about an influential experience. We asked adults, what experience would you say most influenced how you think or feel about nature? Look at all the social connections that came out in their answers. Parents, grandparents, friends, father, grandfather, children. Similarly, we asked children, have you ever had a time outdoors that you will never forget? If yes, please tell me about it. Social connections just jump off this page, way more than trips to iconic wilderness areas. I didn't even bother to use little red circles. There's so many there. You can't look at that without seeing them. So the third recommendation is to engage millennials. Far from being aloof and uncaring about nature and conservation, I hope this research has convinced you, like it did me, that millennials are in fact very interested in taking their place alongside the older generations as the next great generation of conservationists. So this is just one, just in doing some additional research for this talk, I came across this college student who was going to Miami Beach for spring break and saw all the litter and just started picking up, so he spent his whole spring break picking up litter instead of relaxing on the beach with his friends. And then there's this thing called plogging. Does anybody raise your hand if you've ever heard of plogging? Just a couple. So it's a combination of picking up litter and jogging. It's the latest fitness craze, I guess, especially this in the millennial generation. So apparently it originated in Sweden, but it's gaining much bigger foothold in this country and beyond. And it reminded me as I saw Samantha's presentation this morning, and pictures sort of reminded me of Save Our Streams or some kind of a lot of the same work that y'all are doing. And I sure noticed in her presentation that it's just an obvious connection to me. This research that we've done with the work that you're doing in stream cleanups and beyond is a natural place to engage millennials in particular, and then build out the relationship from there. And then I want to show an example of how one U.S. corporation, Zebco, has really jumped on this. So Zebco, of course, manufactured fishing gear. They sold a ton of fishing gear in this country and internationally. They sold a ton of fishing gear to people like me, baby boomers. I caught the very tail end of the baby boom. And they still are. Baby boomers right now have more disposable time and income than any other generation, still buying a lot of stuff. But Zebco, in doing demographic research, or looking at demographic research like we've been doing here and showing here, realized there's a cliff coming. Right? Once the baby boom ages out, the millennials aren't filling in like Gen Xers and millennials aren't filling in like the baby boom. They're not participating at the same rates. So Zebco said, what can we do about that? I went back and found these are some older Zebco ads. And you see there the focus on the rugged individualist, right? It's the focus on baby boom and the silent generation before us. And talking about this remote, iconic experience, talking about technical gear, big fish, all those aspects. And that stuff isn't appealing to the next generation. And so they've changed, and I'm going to show, this is a short video ad. I'm just going to turn off the sound. There's just a song playing behind it. What I really want you to focus on is the images. It's a very short ad. Just take a look at this. Anything strike you about that ad?
Only 3 images of
They're all together.
fishing boat.
That's what's fishing.
Very good. Yeah, you said only 3 images of fishing or fishing gear at all. Prominently featured in the last, right? But not before that. What do they feature? Groups of people, fun, right? They're just out there having fun. That's what this group is really interested in. So this is just one example, one industry that has now decided, hey, we're going to make a concerted effort to go after millennials specifically. And this is what their market research suggests is the best way to do that. Okay, let me try to wrap this up. To me, the Nature of American study and a bunch of other research shines a light on the fact there is a lot at stake at this point in history for conservation. You, the Izaak Walton League, as well as the entire conservation community, are not just in the business of providing a place for nature to thrive. You're not just in the business of providing recreational opportunities or conservation advocacy, as important as those things are. When you help conserve species, and when you protect and restore habitats, and when you guide environmental policy, you are in the business of helping Americans live happier, healthier lives. You're in the business of helping children develop socially, psychologically, and physically. You're in the business of helping create places where Americans want to live, work, and flourish. Connection to nature and wildlife is fundamental to the economic and social well-being of our country, and it's a critical component of American culture and history. For those of us in this room, nature is not just a dispensable amenity, it's woven into the story of our lives, individually and as a community. And there are plenty of people in the younger generations who are just as interested in nature and conservation as the older generations are, but may have very different desires and expectations about how to get to that same place. The challenge for all of you is to decide if you're willing to assess and possibly adapt or change your time-honored approach to make it more appealing and engaging and welcoming to that next generation of conservationists. If this challenge resonates with you, I encourage you to come to the workshop this afternoon where we're going to take a deeper and much more interactive look at this critically important topic. I think we're in the Hulk room at 2:15. So I know I'm the last thing between you and lunch, so I won't be offended if you all want to vote, but if you want to have some time for questions, I'm happy to answer as best I can.